truly my pleasure to be able to kick off our webinar, Forging the Future of Digital Debt Collections. Thank you all for joining. My name is Jordan Elkind. I'm a member of the marketing team at TrueAccord, and I can say that by a very wide margin, I am the least interesting person on the call today. We're very fortunate to be joined by a panel of product luminaries from TrueAccord. It's my great pleasure to introduce Laura Marino, the Chief Product Officer at TrueAccord. Hi, Laura. Roger Lai, Director of Product at TrueAccord, and Tim Yu, Product Manager at TrueAccord. Laura, Roger, Tim, thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Let me offer our participants a bit of a roadmap, so to speak, for this webinar. We'll start with introductions, a quick overview of who we are at TrueAccord. Then we'll have Laura provide us with a behind-the-scenes look at TrueAccord's approach to innovation. We'll then look at 3 examples of new experiments that are pushing the frontiers of what's possible. And we'll close with a quick recap and Q&A. I'd like to ask participants, please feel free to chat questions throughout the session. So without further ado, let me dive into introductions. A bit about us. TrueAccord is a digital-first provider of debt collection solutions. Since 2013, we have been on a mission to reinvent the debt collection space, delivering a superior customer experience while providing industry-leading results. The way that we do this is through our data-driven, digital-first approach to debt collections. Specifically, TrueAccord uses machine learning to power a completely personalized individual collection experience, driving the right message to the consumer at the right time on the right channel. We pair that with a powerful and flexible self-service platform that gives consumers the ability to resolve their debts at their own convenience. And the net of all of this is a powerful end-to-end solution that is continuously optimizing under the hood to deliver great results while ensuring a best-in-class consumer experience. The topic of today's conversation is the future of digital debt collections. And a critical part of forging that future is a data-driven test and learn methodology. To tell us a bit more about TrueAccord's approach to innovation, I'd like to reintroduce you to Laura Marino, TrueAccord's Chief Product Officer. Hi there, Laura.
I'm excited to be here today. And by way of background, I've spent my career in product leadership roles at technology companies across a range of industries, mobility, speech recognition, talent management. And what attracted me about TrueAccord was the opportunity to work with a debt collection company that operates truly like a high-tech startup. You see, successful tech companies have one thing in common. They are obsessed about experimentation. If you think about Google, Amazon, Facebook, at any given time, they're running hundreds of experiments on everything, like where to place a button to increase engagement or what other services to offer to increase satisfaction from their consumers. They know that they have to continuously improve in order to deliver the best experience for their consumers. Now, historically, that has not been the approach in the debt collection industry. But there are 3 factors now that are really putting pressure on our industry to start acting more like the tech industry. The first factor is that consumers themselves are changing in terms of their preferences faster than ever before. Even setting aside the effects of COVID, if you think about how different you shop or bank or order food today compared to how you did it 5 years ago, you will see how fast things are changing. Consumers' expectations for seamless, personalized digital experiences are increasing rapidly. And if you want to keep up with those consumer expectations, you have to be thinking about new ways to meet their needs. The second factor is technology. Over the past few years, there's been an explosion in new digital channels and devices. And that has provided us with new ways to communicate with and connect with consumers in a personalized way at an unprecedented scale. And finally, the data and computing revolution has meant that we no longer have to guess what consumers want or need. We can let the data guide us. Cloud computing, big data, and machine learning have all made it possible to efficiently and compliantly collect, analyze, and learn from data like never before. So to recap, consumer needs and preferences are changing rapidly, and new technologies provide us the ability to keep up with those changes. So the debt collections companies need to now have an innovation strategy, and they need to start operating more like tech startups. But what does it kind of mean to really have a systematic approach to innovation? At TrueAccord, we talk about the innovation flywheel. And I like the analogy of a flywheel because innovation is truly a cycle of perpetual improvement, one that is grounded on deep analytics and a constant focus on improving user experience. The flywheel starts when we identify a problem or area of opportunity. We are constantly monitoring hundreds of performance statistics from our system, so it's possible for us to pinpoint where we should be focusing our energy. For example, we might observe that a certain type of payment plan drives an increase in sign-up and resolution, or perhaps we can see some disparities in the time of day when different consumers tend to engage with email. And spoiler alert, these examples are something we're going to expand a bit more on later in this webinar. But the next step is to generate a hypothesis, which is usually informed by user research. We pride ourselves on being a data-driven company, but we spend a significant amount of time talking to our actual consumers, because while data can tell us where to focus on, it's really the voice of the customer that often gives us the best inspiration as to how to solve a problem. Next, we will create an experimental design that allows us to test our hypotheses. Think of it as a medical trial for a new drug. In order for this new drug to be approved, it must show that it's more effective than the next best alternative. So if we are testing a new predictive model, it will have to demonstrate that it is better than the current model that we have. Now, once we've conclusively determined that a new feature will drive better results and better consumer experience, then we will push it live to production. And as you might expect, we have lots of testing and quality assurance in order to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And finally, we will closely measure and monitor the performance of this new feature, and we'll continue to optimize it over time, which leads us back into the beginning of the flywheel. Now, this may sound a little bit theoretical, so let me walk you through an actual example of the innovation flywheel in action using a project that the team worked on a few years ago. The first step is data analysis to uncover an area of opportunity. In this case, the team spent significant time looking at payment plan outcomes, and they realized that payment plans are not created equal. Some of them keep and some fail over time. So the team came up with the conclusion that even a modest improvement in our ability to keep people on their payment plans longer would yield huge improvements for creditors and also a much better experience for consumers. So the next step in the cycle was to generate a hypothesis. How do we better keep people on their payment plans? So the team did a lot of research and spent significant time talking to our consumers. And they realized that payday is a hugely important for consumers who have cash flow challenges. So what if we offer the ability to align payments with payday? Would that help consumers stay longer with their payment plans? So for the experimental design, we took all consumers over a certain time frame and randomly assigned them to one of three groups. Group one was our current approach, where the consumer gets to select her own payment day. And this is the control group, the baseline against which we would be testing the alternative approaches. Group two was the payday hypothesis, allowing customers to specify and align payments with their paydays. And we wanted to see if this would result in lower payment plan failure. And group three was one where we automatically defaulted consumers into a pre-selected day of the week, Friday in this case. Now, random assignment of consumers to treatment groups is critical in the experimental design because it helps us attribute the changing behavior that we see across groups to the treatment itself. So in this case, if we saw lower rates of payment plan failure among the pay on payday group, we would be confident in really understanding that it was because of the payment plan. Now, what we learned through this experiment was pretty amazing. But let me first give you a little bit of context on how we look at results. We use statistical tools like significance testing and confidence intervals to evaluate the success of our experiments. These tools help us ensure that we didn't just get lucky with the results, and that if we were to repeat the experiment many, many times, we would see similar outcomes. Take a look at this graph here. This is a graph showing the willingness to sign up for a payment plan by group. The blue figure all the way to the left shows the payment plan sign-up rate for the pay on payday group. It is much higher than the group in the middle, the default Friday group, or the group on the right, which was our control group. This is a simplified explanation, and I'm sure that our data science team would not be very happy with it, but you may think of the boxes and the lines coming out from the center of each group as equivalent to the margin of error in polls. It shows how much we might expect the results to deviate from one experiment to the next. In technical terms, this is the 95th percentile confidence interval for each group. And the fact that the pay on payday group's interval is so far above that of the other groups gives us pretty compelling evidence that this was not just a lucky result. The payday group was much more likely to sign up for a payment plan. And this was a very exciting result, but what we saw after the sign up was even more interesting. In the graph to the right, the blue line represents the group of pay on payday consumers. Red represents the pay on Friday, and orange represents the control. And as you can see, over the duration of the payment plan, a significantly higher percentage of the consumers from the pay on payday group stay on plan compared to the two other groups. So in other words, the consumers who were encouraged to align payment dates with their payday showed both a higher willingness to sign up for a payment plan and a higher payment plan success rate over time. Now, this is just one example of hundreds of experiments that we run at TrueAccord. And truth be told, the results of other experiments are not necessarily as impressive as the ones from this specific experiment. But ultimately, our innovation flywheel gives us a data-driven tool to ensure that we're constantly doing what is best for our consumers. So it's against this backdrop that I would like to have some of the members of my team now walk you through more recent innovations that we are doing that are actively pushing the frontiers of digital collections.
Thank you so much, Laura. What an eloquent frame for the next section of our presentation, where we're going to ask Roger and Tim to join us in a bit of spirited conversation to walk through 3 case studies of innovation grounded in precisely the flywheel methodology that you just shared. Specifically, we're going to anchor ourselves around 3 fundamental ways that the world has changed recently. First, an increase in consumer financial complications and instability, which has added to the likelihood of payment plan failures and breakage. Secondly, an uptick in inbox fatigue. I don't know if other folks experience this to the same extent that I do, but I've certainly observed a crushing deluge of new emails showing up in my inbox daily, which has forced providers to ask difficult questions around how we cut through the noise and deliver relevant messages at the right time. And finally, shifting landscape and financial realities that have necessitated defining new ways to engage and educate consumers during these times. Tim, I'd like to start with you. You've spent a good deal of time thinking about how to solve for payment plan breakage. Can you provide a bit of context on the challenges that led you to invest in some of the new innovations in this area?
Sure, Jordan. Thanks for the introduction. So when it comes to self-serve recurring plans that customers set up through our website on their own, we really dug into the roots of why they break their payment plans. And what we found is that it's mostly because they don't have enough funds in their bank account when a recurring payment is due and withdrawn. And that results in their payments failing and their payment plan breaking. And on top of that, even costing them additional insufficient fund charges from their bank, which puts them in an even worse financial position. And there's a lot of reasons that can happen. They could get overwhelmed with having too many bills. They could fail to just properly plan for tight cash flow. They could have unpredictable expenses come up, or even unpredictable lower amounts of income come in, et cetera. And especially with the stimulus having run out a while ago and continuing unemployment challenges and just COVID-related challenges, it's certainly not getting any easier for consumers. And so from a solution standpoint, we really learned just how difficult it is to get customers to take remedial actions on their plan after they failed a payment. And having a reactive approach is table stakes, but we realized it's really not the most effective. And so we thought, how can we more proactively mitigate the chances of failed payments occurring to begin with? And so as a data-driven company, we knew we had a big competitive advantage when it comes to our ability to use large amounts of data and machine learning to unlock better performance at scale for our consumers. And we just have so much historical data around our customers, such as their debt and payment plan information, their behaviors around email or even contact with their call center, their behavior around payments, and so much more. So what if we could use all of that data to predict the likelihood of a customer failing a future payment in an existing payment plan at any given time? We could generate dynamic risk scores and identify whether a customer is low or high risk in terms of breaking their plans. And on top of that, we can proactively offer these tailored solutions, actions that customers can take to reduce their chances of breaking these plans.
Tim, I'd love to jump in with a quick question. I would love to have you articulate what are some of the benefits in your view of a model-based approach as opposed to a one-size-fits-all approach for mitigating payment plan breakage?
Sure, that's a great question. So one size fit all sort of assumes that every consumer is not only the same person with the same circumstances from a financial standpoint, but also same in terms of the debts, the type of debts that they have, their balances, et cetera. And the truth is, when it comes to finances, everyone is just so different. Everyone's so unique. And there's another layer to this, especially in these really unpredictable times of COVID. There's even less predictability in terms of, how a consumer circumstances will change, whether it's with their behavior or with their financial situations. And so by taking a model-based approach, we're able to, in real time and in a dynamic way, be able to take large amounts of data points and be able to generate these, understand these different patterns around our consumers through these different traits and attributes of these customers and their behavioral data and their debts and their plans, and use that to understand what is the best way to target the specific group of consumers in a way that makes the most sense for them. And so it just leads to a much more powerful ability for us to really tailor these personalized actions for consumers that increase their chances of success.
Understood. And I suspect that some of the folks who are joining us on the webinar today may be familiar with other predictive scoring approaches, for example, prioritized call lists. Can you tell us a little bit about how the modeling approach adopted here might differ from the predictive approach commonly in use in other areas of the debt collection space?
Sure thing. So there's some similarity between traditional scoring and our model-based approach, in the sense like we're all trying to identify customers, like who are our best customers, and how can we sort of personalize actions for them more. But there's sort of two major ways in which our approach has significant advantages over the traditional approach. The first one is just the large and broad amount of data that we have access to, and this includes everything from what is their balance amount of their debt, what is the amount of money they paid so far on their payment plan, and even to things like what type of payments are they making? Are these ACH or are these card payments? And even like behavioral information, such as how many days has it been since they last opened their email? How often do they engage with our emails? There's all these data points that we're able to use in a very efficient way and at scale that can sort of help inform this model. As we feed more data into this model, the model can actually learn in a dynamic and real-time way how to understand a large amount of consumers. So more specifically, the second big advantage that we have is the ability to score consumers in a sort of dynamic and real-time way. And so, for example, let's say that we take all these data points and we're able to identify a group of consumers that are at high risk of breaking a payment plan, right? And let's say that we deliver these targeted treatments towards them. For example, we give them the ability to lower their payment amounts. And they could end up taking those treatments and become more successful than they were before. And then from that point, they would then potentially turn from being a high risk customer to a lower risk customer. So just our ability to, to be able to understand customers in this dynamic way, always changing way, being able to adapt to the changing data points, that is extremely powerful. And we're able to do that really, really efficiently with our machine learning models.
That's very exciting, Tim. Would love to learn a little bit about what the team has learned over the course of this experiment.
Sure thing. So with this experiment, we're really testing the effectiveness of our payment plan breakage risk predictor model, and also testing a treatment where high-risk customers would actually get emailed an option to reduce their installment amounts just by simply extending their plan out. And a further nuance that we're testing is also whether sending this treatment 3 or 5 days in advance would perform better. And so far, we've proven with statistical significance that our risk predictor model actually works. So customers that we've identified as high risk are actually 1.7 times more likely to break their plans. And we're also seeing some pretty early positive results on performance with our treatments down the funnel, from payment plan breakage through resolution. But what are the, I'm happy to talk about, implications too as well.
Yeah, well, let's, now that we've got you on the line, let's hear about it. I mean, my initial reaction here is this seems incredibly promising, both from a results standpoint and in terms of alleviating a huge pain point for consumers who might suffer from insufficient funds around the time of payment plan. What's next on the roadmap for this solution, and where do you want to take it?
Yeah, so for low risk customers who are have a much lower chance of breaking their plans, we can explore how we can maintain and further optimize their chances of being successful in resolving their debts without doing anything too drastic that would increase their risk level. So, for example, we could try asking even if they want to increase their installment payment amounts just so they can pay off their debt sooner, which ultimately is good for a consumer if they're able to do so, right? Just giving them that option. Now, for high-risk customers, we can start to pursue more substantial treatment options, whether it's through increasing plan flexibility, delivering even more targeted email content, more useful email content, et cetera. So for example, we could explore increasing the number of days they could defer their next payment, allowing them to modify installment dates for an entire plan, allowing them to skip payments while also extending a plan. I mean, there's so many treatments that we could target to the consumers and really use experimentation to measure whether it's actually statistically significantly improving their performance. So yeah, really exciting.
It sounds like you've got an exciting and ambitious roadmap ahead of you, Tim. Congratulations to you and the team on exciting progress so far. Now, shifting gears, Roger, would love to hear a bit more about how you've been thinking about solving for inbox fatigue. I should mention you also have several years under your belt of thinking about similar questions of how to improve the performance of email. So let me flip it over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. So to start, I think we can start with a couple of interconnected large trends that we've seen since kind of COVID started, which is one, behaviors, right? Behaviors have started shifting rapidly. The acceleration towards digital is a real thing, and in response to that, more and more businesses are reaching consumers at higher volumes through email. And what that means is it's easier than ever to get lost in an inbox, right? And what that also means is inbox providers such as Gmail and Yahoo, et cetera, they're updating their algorithms at a rapid pace to ensure that their consumers are getting the content that most resonates with them. So it's an ongoing battle to be able to get content in front of consumers that matters to them.
At the risk of asking a naive question, we've been hearing about the death of email for many years now, especially with the proliferation of new digital channels like SMS, chat, you name it. I take it that you do not subscribe to the notion that email is dead and might in fact be a more important channel than ever. Why is email still so essential for connecting with consumers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, one, we are expanding our digital channels, right? So we're evolving towards a truly intelligent omni-channel strategy where, regardless of channel, depending on consumer preference, we're able to reach them how they want to be reached, right? That being said, yeah, email is not going away. I don't subscribe to that notion that email is dead. It is a channel that's going to continue to drive phenomenal consumer engagement. And the reasons why, it's very consumer friendly, right? It's unobtrusive, like a consumer can choose to engage with an email and choose to open, choose to click. It's very actionable. There's lots of real estate. You kind of get the necessary disclosures and information about a debt in front of them. And it's very instrumented, right? So we are a very data-driven company. With every single email that we're sending out, we can measure opens, clicks, folks that are repeatedly open. These are all signals that inform the models that we build.
Understood. So it sounds like email is not only not going anywhere, it might even be more important than ever during a time when consumers are stressed out, being bombarded by text message notifications. It's a consumer-friendly and effective communication channel.
That's right.
Okay, so where do we go from here? It sounds like the stakes are high and the challenges are pretty significant as well.
Yeah, so we have to improve personalization, right? So it's something that we've always done, and I think with the current environment, it sort of accelerated our experimentation much more rapidly. So we've been working hard at this for the last few months. We've been introducing new models to ensure that we're able to reach a consumer with the most relevant, effective messages. And so I wanted to highlight 3 aspects among the many different things that we're doing to improve performance of our email personalization. So one is training our machine learning platform, Heartbeat. It's our decision engine. It's core to what we do, to optimize not just for engagement like opens and clicks, but also for actual commitment to a payment plan, like deeper in the funnel. 2 is we spent time working on improving the model that tailors the frequency of emails to the preferences of the individual consumers. As I mentioned, behaviors are changing, right? So some consumers might prefer getting only 1 email a week, while others might be more receptive to 3 or 4. But the idea is that you want to find the cadence that is most effective, right? Respecting the differences in individual preferences. And then the last one I would highlight is the send time optimizer, right? So this is a model that ensures that we're reaching the consumer by email at the time of day when she's most likely to engage, right? So one consumer might be checking her email on mid-afternoon break, while another might be engaged first thing in the morning. And this is important to be able to build models to understand the patterns of consumers and be able to reach them individually at the right time.
Roger, I would love to double click on the first one here, training Heartbeat to optimize for commitment. Could you talk us through what are the benefits of optimizing for an action that's further down in the funnel, as you described it? And also, why is it challenging? It seems like a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's with commitment and outcomes that are deeper in the funnel. The challenge, historically speaking, has been around you need enough data to build an effective model there, right? So over the past year or so, we've kind of reached this inflection point, this tipping point, if you will, where we have millions of consumers on the website that are coming, or millions of consumers that we're reaching out to and engaging with us. And so with that, we're able to get stronger signals for folks who are engaging with content deeper in the funnel and also going on the website and starting to select a plan or dropping off, things like that. And so we're able to build more targeted, tailored models that are more effective now that we have this data, to be able to reach out to them and drive them through the conversion funnel.
Understood. So understandably, there's a lot more data with kind of superficial engagement like opens and clicks than there is actual resolution or commitment. And so it's a matter of having the critical mass that makes complete sense. Would like to now double click on the other two experiments that you've talked about. I guess if I'm thinking about it, there are hundreds of ways that you could tackle the problem of making email more personalized. Some of them are represented here. Others might have to do with the email content itself, subject lines. Why was your team so passionate and eager to solve for the right number of emails and the right time of day to send them to consumers?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the innovation flywheel and the process of experimentation that Laura covered earlier on in the webinar. So it goes back to analysis and monitoring and understanding the patterns that we're seeing. So we've had years of experience of sending emails, and we know from experience and know from diving deep into the data that cadence and send time matter quite a bit. So with cadence, as an example, right, one might think, hey, it's better to send more and more emails to get in front of them and kind of beat the competition, which is everyone else also sending emails, right? But what can consumers do? They have an option of unsubscribing. They also have the option of marking your email as spam. So you have to factor those things into consideration. And how do you do that at scale, right? You have to build a model to do that, to tailor towards every single individual in our system. And the same goes for send time, same sort of thesis.
Great example of letting observations from the data guide the areas of priority around experimentation. We'd love to give you a few moments to talk us through some of the results that you've seen as you've rolled out some of these innovations.
Cool, thanks, Jordan. So early results so far are very, very promising. So currently we're seeing a close to 2% uptick in email open rate from these new models and enhancements. and also a meaningful increase in commitment rate as well. So if you look at these like 1.8% and 1.6%, these numbers might look small in absolute terms, but as sort of going back to the whole innovation flywheel theme, when we have a portfolio of experiments running that are live and more in the pipeline, these small improvements compound over time to help continuously improve our ability to deliver a better, more effective consumer experience.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Roger. Great overview of kind of re-anchoring the true north for how we optimize the email model, and then discovering new mechanisms for personalizing the cadence and send time to the preferences of the individual consumer. And now, Roger, you're actually on the hot seat again. I'd love to talk a little bit about how digital collections providers must adapt their approach to outreach and consumer engagement during a time of truly historic change.
Sure. Over the past few months, many consumers have obviously seen change in their financial circumstances. We've kind of touched on this. We spoke about within the context of payment plan breakage, right? At the same time, we also set out to solve a more fundamental question: how do we keep consumers engaged and educated, whether or not collections emails are being sent, right? And this isn't just a hypothetical question, right? There's just more consumers who are in a proactive hardship pause from collections activity. We even, at the start of COVID, we solicited consumers to let us know if they're impacted by COVID, and not surprisingly, there are many who have let us know that they lost their job or otherwise qualified for hardship pause in debt collection. So our hypothesis was that keeping consumers engaged and informed, particularly about COVID relief and other resources available during the pandemic, would one, help consumers improve their financial health, two, build trust in the TrueAccord brand, and then lastly, three, ultimately, we would increase the likelihood of consumers eventually resolving their balances when they're financially ready and able. So the approach that we took was to build an email content engine to engage consumers with non-collections content in those cases where collections have been proactively paused. So in order to actually bring this approach to life, we had to actually solve for two main challenges. One was we actually had to build the machinery to manage those communications with consumers we've paused their collections communication, and it forced us to build a personalized delivery system that allowed us to add support for different types of content outreach. Right, so that's number one. Number two, second challenge is building a library of content that would be relevant and useful to our audience. And this is where we relied on a content strategy team's unique experience to build out that compelling messaging strategy.
Roger, I just want to pause and ask you a question. I mean, the goal of keeping consumers informed and educated certainly makes sense. What was it that gave you conviction, or gave us conviction, that TrueAccord was the right party to do this? There are lots of governmental agencies and NGOs out there with a similar mission. What advantage would we have in such an initiative?
That's a great question. I think that there are primarily four reasons. One is that our personalized delivery system makes us expert at reaching the right consumer at scale. So we do have a 99% deliverability rating, which means that we're experts at ensuring that messages actually get to the intended recipients. Two, our content strategy team brings long expertise and best practices in how we create these compelling and compliant messages to engage consumers. Three, I mentioned brand trust, and I think this is evidenced by our Google reviews, where we have a 4.8 rating. And so we've sort of continued to build on that brand trust. And then lastly, I would say we do have an engagement team that speaks to consumers every day, where we do have that feedback loop back to the content team of understanding what types of information that consumers are looking for.
Understood. So it sounds like the hypothesis was we are uniquely positioned to change the dialogue with consumers, to educate and inform them at the same time that we increase their long-term likelihood of resolution once they're financially able. Here we have a couple of results of informational emails that have been sent out to consumers. Tell us a bit about what you found and what, if anything, surprised you as this strategy unfolded.
Yeah, ultimately it's allowed us to change the dialogue with consumers, right? So this is new to us, right? We're able to keep them engaged whether or not they're actually actively in collections. And as you can see here, some of the early engagement numbers with our content underscores that it is indeed this content is perceived to be relevant and useful, right? We're seeing open rates of 18% down 16% on unemployment types of content. And and finally, I think the surprising thing is that like some consumers, like in this situation, right, they ultimately still choose to pay, right? We're staying top of mind. The result is that these folks are better engaged, more educated, and I think longer term increases the likelihood of them resolving their balance with TrueAccord.
Well, thank you, Roger. And thank you so much as well to Laura and Tim. It's truly a special treat to have you join us and share your perspective. To recap what we've discussed, we started out with Laura articulating why innovation is no longer a luxury or a nice to have for the collections industry. It's a must. And that's necessitated by rapidly changing consumer preferences and changing needs at a time when the technology exists to enable us to be more attentive and truly let the consumer guide us. That would be true regardless, but especially given some of the fundamental ways in which the world has changed over the past few months. We've seen systematic changes in consumer behavior, usage of technology. Roger alluded to some of the unique pressures mounting on email inboxes. And all of this has increased the necessity, the stakes for companies in the collections industry to ultimately develop a methodology to ensure continuous innovation that has consumer experience at the heart of it. The flywheel is TrueAccord's approach to one such methodology. And we looked at 3 case studies of how that is helping to continually push the frontiers of what's possible within the collection space. Now, I'd like to take a couple of moments here to address some of the questions that have been flowing in. First of all, I should just acknowledge what an incredible webinar participant community we have. There have been a torrent of questions coming in for our participants. So I'll actually start. Laura, it looks like this first question might be perhaps a pitch towards you, which is, I'm just reading it here. What are some of the biggest challenges that a company might face in implementing a methodology like TrueAccord's flywheel? So these could be bumps in the road that we experienced, or other challenges or roadblocks that similar companies might encounter in their own journeys.
So I think that there's probably 3 main things to keep in mind. The first one is truly a mindset. This concept of really having this approach to experimentation, innovation as an ongoing basis requires a mindset and a buy-in from the entire organization. The nice thing about TrueAccord is that this was part of the DNA of TrueAccord to start with, which has made it a lot easier, but it really is a whole approach and a buy-in of the entire organization. The second one is the skill set. You really need to have the skill set to implement this type of innovation. And that includes, of course, data scientists, data engineers, and on the product management side, people like Tim and Roger, who really understand how to interpret and analyze the data to drive the next hypothesis, to drive what we need to do next. So that's kind of the skill set. And finally, something that's particularly important in this industry is being able to do innovation in a way that's very responsible, that is very compliance oriented. We are in a very regulated industry, and we need to make sure that compliance is a first-class citizen. So every time we do experimentation, every time we come up with a new treatment, we are also making sure that we're being compliant with every piece of regulation by state, by city, if necessary, so that as we extend new functionality, we're doing it in a way that's compliant.
Thank you, Laura. You alluded, your middle bullet point was around skill set and the rigor that it requires to become excellent at data analytics. The next question is actually very pertinent to that. This is a question for, I would suspect, Tim and Roger, which is, tell us a little bit about how TrueAccord does data analytics, the types of platforms that you use, and anything that you might recommend as far as tools for other companies that are looking to up-level their analytical fluency.
Okay, I'll take this one, I guess, and Roger, feel free to add into this.
Sure.
So yeah, from an analytics standpoint, it's really about just being able to really understand your consumer behavior across their journey. So for TrueAccord specifically, coming from emails, right, which is their initial touch point with TrueAccord, all the way through their ability to actually resolve their debts, and then what happens after that. And so if you're talking about specific platforms, like at TrueAccord specifically, we'll use Looker, but there's a lot of different data analytic platform that's dependent on sort of what your needs are. From a consumer experience standpoint, it will leverage more other third-party analytics platforms that are more events-based, such as being able to understand customers clicking on a certain place and the funnel going from one page to another page, from one feature to another feature. Those are companies like Mixpanel, Amplitude, etc. So there's really a wide range of products that you can use to do analytics. And Roger, feel free to add more to that.
Yeah, I would just add that I don't think there's like a one size fits all technology or platform that helps with across all the things that you need to do to understand your consumers, understand your customers. So in addition to what Tim mentioned is, if you have the talent, I would highly encourage building out things like an experimentation framework, or your own experimentation capabilities, because it's unique, right? Our industry is unique. It's not a cookie cutter kind of plug and play consumer product. So there's certain elements that I think you'll want to take in-house.
I would add, you've heard us talk about machine learning, and that really is something that enables us to learn a lot about with the data that we have. But you do need to have a team that really understands AI and machine learning. There's a lot of hype around those technologies in every industry, but you really need to have a team that can build the right machine learning models for the specific industry you're in, and that understand which types of approaches to machine learning are going to be the ones that are effective for the very specific tasks that we're trying to focus on.
That is literally a flawless transition to the next question, which is, what are some of the most commonly misunderstood things about machine learning and AI, things that are overhyped in the industry, or would benefit from a little bit of clarification?
You get a lot of hype into new forms of new subsets of machine learning, right? So there's a lot of hype around deep learning. There's a lot of hype around neural networks. And ultimately it's like, you have to start with the problem, right? If you don't understand the problem space and how, and then you won't understand how certain methodologies could be applied towards solving your problem. So you want to start with the problem, want to start with the consumer's problems, and right before jumping into, oh, let's look at deep learning, let's look at some other sexy thing that's been talked about in that space.
So starting with the problem, that makes total sense. One of our astute webinar attendees observed that this was kind of like a cooking show. Like, we showed the beginning of the problem and then we showed the answer to the problem, but it was unclear how much time elapsed during the course of these experiments. So this individual wondered if we could elaborate on what the typical duration of an experiment is across any of the examples that we shared in the webinar today.
I'm happy to speak to that. So the time that it takes for an experiment to complete is highly dependent on sort of what are the success metrics we're looking for with the experiment and sort of what area the experiment is around, right? Ultimately, it's about how much data we're able to ingest into experiment. How many customers are we able to include in the experiment, and how many data points result from the actions that they take. So, for example, with emails, typically those experiments would probably take much faster if it's more at the top of the funnel when it comes to top of the funnel where customers are only just learning about their debts and acknowledging that they exist. But then as you get deeper into the funnel, such as performance metrics around resolving the debt, right? Those are things that take time. People don't resolve their debt typically in like a month or something. It usually takes over a span of 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, over a year, etc. And so typically what we try to do is we try to find success metrics that can be leading indicators of what the ultimate success is going to be, which is a lot of times resolving their debt. But what are some things before that that's earlier in the funnel that could be used to say, okay, if this metric looks good, then chances are that it's going to improve this further metric downstream metrics. So for example, with payment plan breakage, we can assume that if we're able to reduce the payment plan breakage rate, if we're able to reduce the payment failures for customers, that's going to eventually lead to a higher resolution rate. And so in those cases, we don't necessarily need to let the experiment run for a very long time until we see numbers being moved on a resolution standpoint, because we could take an earlier metric, which would help us complete the experiment in a much faster time, and then make those results, those treatments permanent if we're seeing a positive effect there. So ultimately, it really depends again on what we're trying to measure and what part of the funnel it's related to, and what area of our product.
Gotcha. Thanks, Tim. And it looks like we have time for maybe one final question. This one I suspect I'm going to fire over to Roger. So the question is that you highlighted a couple of recent trends around email engagement, like increased volume and increased rigor amongst email clients in how they define spam. Are there other email trends that you've observed more broadly that are interesting or relevant for folks in the debt collections space, and what do they mean for the industry?
Sure. So there's certainly an ongoing increase in, I would say, like mobile share of the inbox. And that highlights the importance of having responsive and mobile-friendly messages, so that when you're sending these emails, you have that in mind, that you're building mobile first. You alluded to it, but yeah, email providers such as Gmail, Yahoo, and AOL, they share the same email infrastructure. And then all the Microsoft domains, right? They're all, it's a continued problem that they're solving for, which is how on their side improve engagement with their inbox technology. So the constant updating of algorithms to detect spam, and also with Gmail, more and more experimentation of getting things into the promotions tab more accurately, right? And so those are the types of things where you have to really build out a strong sender reputation, and you basically just have to follow all the best practices when it comes to deliverability. Yeah, I think last thing I would say is there's just more and more interactive email formats, right? Videos, embedded interactions, way more like marketing materials than debt collection, obviously. But it's interesting to see how that translates.
Roger, Tim, Laura, thank you, all three of you, for sharing your insights and perspective with us today. By way of wrapping up, before we part ways, I'd like to also thank all of our participants and attendees on the webinar. So many fantastic questions, and I'm sorry we haven't had the chance to answer them all. I would like to thank you again to our wonderful participants, and we look forward to getting a chance to chat with you again soon.